Welcome back to yet another edition of the I Prefer the 80s and 90s Sports podcast editorial, where I, Richard Harris, talk about why I prefer the sports of the 80s and 90s over today. Today's topic is baseball, as we are in the final 2 weeks of the season, about 12 games left to play until we reach the postseason. Today's topic is going to be playoff baseball, because for some reason I prefer the playoff baseball of the 80s and 90s than I do today. And I'll tell you why. And you can tell me if I'm wrong. In the 80s and 90s, it seemed that most of the teams that made the postseason had pitchers that was the dominant guy. Whether you're talking about Mike Scott from the Houston Astros, Dwight Gooden and Roger Clemens, Frank Viola, Brett Saberhagen, Jack Morris. These are guys who pitched on teams that they were Cy Young Award winners. They were the reason in a lot of cases and why their teams won in the playoffs. Yes, there were a few teams that won it with their bullpens. The 90 Reds, Jose Rio was the stud starting pitcher, but that bullpen of Dibble and Randy Myers shut it all down. In 84, Willie Hernandez was the stud pitcher, and he helped lead the Tigers to a championship in 84. And of course, the GOAT, Mariano Rivera, closed out many a World Series for the Yankees, and therefore helped them and led them and guaranteed them wins in World Series. The only World Series that he didn't come through was against Arizona, but that was in the 2000s, not in the 80s and 90s. And so baseball, we all know, we've talked about ad nauseum, maybe not blogged about it enough, but to change the rules for pitchers in baseball. In baseball, in the 80s and 90s, managers, pitching coaches wore a path out to the mound every game to try to present themselves with the best matchups to face the quality hitters. Today, you're only allowed 6 visits to the mound for the entire game. So if your pitcher is getting lit up in the first inning, second inning, third inning, fourth inning, fifth inning, sixth inning, after the sixth inning, you can't come out there and save nobody. You just got to take the whooping, which is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Baseball has created rules today to hurt the game instead of to make the game competitive and watchable. They think mound visits is a problem. They think throwing the first base is a problem. They think that pitchers just are not important in the games because they feel, I believe, that pitchers have an advantage over a hitter. And the reality is they do have an advantage over the hitter. They're the one throwing the ball. They think they know where the ball is going. They know what pitch they're throwing. And so therefore, it makes sense that they have an advantage. The only advantage a hitter has is contact. If he makes contact, nobody knows where the ball is going to go. A hitter can think that he got one, but he didn't. A hitter can hit the ball square, but the ball can go straight on the ground for an out. A hitter can hit the ball by mistake, and it becomes a hit. A hitter can hit a ball, didn't think he got it all, didn't get it off the good part of the bat, and it still go out. So I understand the frustration that Major League Baseball may have with the fact that for all the advantages that pitchers have, a hitter can still defy it, but the rules are stupid, plain and simple. And I hate using that word stupid but the rules are stupid. Now, I preferred the baseball games of the 80s and 90s because you knew that going into a game, that if, say, Jim Palmer, who wasn't a pitcher that much in the 80s, came out to pitch, he was going to pitch a good game, and you really had to score. Steve Carlton was going to come in and pitch, and it was about the pitchers, and it was about the electricity and the atmosphere that was created. Fernando in 81, again, about him and his ability to pitch. You knew the Dodgers that season was going to be tough to beat. Oral Hershiser in 1988, despite the fact that the Mets beat the Dodgers that year during the season 11 out of 12 times in the postseason and was up 3-1 in the playoffs against them, the Dodgers found a way to prevail in the postseason because they rode the arm of a hot pitcher. The St. Louis Cardinals had a great pitcher named John Tudor. Tudor was brilliant in the playoffs in the 80s. He used to kill me because he used to kill my Mets. But you rode a hot pitcher, and that pitcher usually took you to the promised land. Then what happened in the 80s and 90s, it became more about rotations. Because the Braves had a rotation, but the Braves only won one World Series. Try saying that 3 times. Only one World Series. But that rotation kept them in the postseason consistently. For they were in the World Series, I believe, in 91 against the Twins. They were in the World Series against the Blue Jays. And then finally in 95, they were able to take down Cleveland in a very good series. But that was it. They didn't win any World Series after that. After winning, 14 straight division championships, they only won one championship. And in recent years, they've won now 6 straight division championships. They only got one title right now. My point is, baseball today is about the bullpens in the postseason. Because the starting pitchers are not used to pitching long in games. And for some crazy reason, the greatest pitcher of this generation, the greatest 2 pitchers of this generation, are not postseason superstars. Justin Verlander has won, I think, 3 Cy Youngs. He just won one last year at age 38. He's thrown 3 no-hitters, but in the postseason, he's average. Clayton Kershaw, who is probably the best pitcher of this generation, multiple Cy Young Award winner, multiple appearances in the postseason, finally got a World Series ring a few years ago with the Dodgers, but it wasn't because of him. It was because of Corey Seager and because their bullpen was lethal. The reason why last postseason was mind-boggling, the Braves were the hottest team in the history of baseball. They won some crazy number of games. They won like 72 of their last 122 games, something crazy like that. And got to the postseason, and the Phillies, who they dominated during the regular season, knocked them out. And it was mostly because of the bullpen. Because the Phillies adopted the plan that the Yankees did in the 80s and 90s, which changed all the rules in baseball, which was you burn the hell out of the starting pitchers. You make them throw 6 pitches and a bat, probably, meaning that they had to go to 3-ball, 2-strike counts in most cases. The pitcher is tired by the 5th, 6th inning. You bring in the bullpen. Most teams during the postseason follow the same sequence, meaning if you have a pitcher who's the 6th inning guy, he's the 6th inning guy. 7th inning guy is the 7th inning guy. If it's the same guy, then he does both innings. Then you got an 8th inning guy, then you got a 9th inning guy, and then you hold your breath for extra innings because now you got to go get pitchers who don't pitch as often. And so it becomes an advantage for the hitters because now the hitters are seeing the same pitchers all the time. And that is what killed and probably prompted this stratagem of Major League Baseball of what they do with the bullpens now, with the pitch clock, with all the nonsense they did to hurt baseball. Every team thought that they could have what the Yankees had. The Yankees had a plan, first of all, to crush your pitcher in terms of tiring him out. And then they had a second plan where they were like, okay, um, we're going to go righty righty, lefty lefty, and we're going to use the same pitchers to get the same guys out because the hitters don't have enough time in between games to adjust, even though they truly do have time to adjust. Ramiro Mendoza was going to throw a sinker. And so they left him in to face lefties and righties because his sinker could get them both out. Mike Stanton pitched in the 90s for the Yankees. He was the lefty guy. You knew he was going to throw cut fastballs to get you out, and he did. The Red Sox had Mike Timlin. Mike Timlin threw a hard, penetrating fastball. And so he faced right-handed hitters. And he got a lot of them out. And then they would finish the games with the guys they finished the games with, whether it was Papelbon, whether it was Keith Foulke. And the Yankees, of course, used John Wetteland and Mariano Rivera. The Mets had the same thing, too. Roger McDowell. He would come in and pitch in the 8th inning, throw that sinker ball. 6th inning, throw that sinker ball. Get people out. Rick Aguilera, same thing. To get to Orozco, who would close the games. Every team had that pattern. There were no Dave Stewarts. There are no Dave Stewarts who would be the guy, number one guy, every series, dominate, and move on. Yeah, you can bring up Madison Bumgarner, but that was only one series. He wasn't the reason why the Giants won, 3 championships in 4 or 5 years. The Giants won because of Lincecum and Matt Cain. They had other pitchers who could get people out. But the bottom line, the one season that they had a GOAT type player, he was voted Athlete of the Year in Sports Illustrated, was the Bumgarner years. We haven't seen nobody since that, since 2015. Most of the teams today are getting by bullpens. And if your bullpen is getting lit up, you got no chance. The Phillies last year against the Braves, bullpen was unbelievable. They stunk during the regular season. All of a sudden, they discovered something in the postseason and crushed the Braves' path. Now, the Phillies even made it to the World Series. They did the same thing to the Padres because the lefty they had last year from the Phillies could pitch to the lefty good hitters of the Padres. And the Padres' best hitters kind of were the lefties. Even though Tatis Jr. was out for the rest of the season, so it was the lefties. And so they're able to get the lefties out. But in the World Series against Houston, the Phillies couldn't get people out because Astros only had 2 lefties, Tucker and Alvarez, who were their 2 best players, but they couldn't handle Dubon. They couldn't handle the kid who won the MVP of the World Series, the rookie, because he was a righty and he could hit. And so my simple point is that's the difference between the 80s and 90s and the postseason. The 80s and 90s postseason teams rode a guy. You knew that you were going to see and dread seeing Bruce Hurst for the Red Sox. Even though Clemens was their best pitcher, in the postseason, it was Bruce Hurst. The Mets did not want to see Mike Scott. Mike Scott was lethal. Mike Scott shut him out the first game, 1-0, 14 strikeouts, beating Doc Gooden. And then beating them again in the next start. And the Mets were like, oh my God, we lose this game 6. We're going to have to see this sucker again who we can't hit. And luckily, extra innings, we got it done. And so today's postseason, I sit and laugh because they start way back in May and sometimes in June, most times in June, they start talking about who's going to be the championship team. They start talking about this team is definitely going to be that. And this year, Arizona was dominating the NL West, and then Dodgers just said enough. And now the Dodgers have a double-digit lead. The Braves have already clinched a playoff spot. I believe so have the Dodgers. But my point is, you can't go around for saying who's going to win anymore because you don't know whose bullpen is going to get it done. Because if you look at all the teams going into the postseason this season, Baltimore doesn't have a stud ace pitcher that they can go, that's our number one, and he can definitely beat whoever. Tampa Bay's lost their ace pitcher to McClanahan's out for the season with a bad arm. Toronto doesn't have that guy. I mean, Gossman is good, but he's not the stud. Ryu is not a number one. He's more of a 3 or a 2. I mean, I can go team for team. Strider for the Braves is good, but he's not a lights out guy. I mean, he'll strike out 12, but he'll give up 4 or 5 runs. I mean, the Dodgers, Kershaw's done this so many times that so many teams know how to face Kershaw. So many teams know how to hit Kershaw. And so it would totally be matchup based, but he won't be expected to go more than 6 innings. The days of Dave Stewart are gone. Dave Stewart would pitch 8 innings and then give Eckersley the ball and they'd take it over. Or Bobby Welch would take over, would pitch 8 innings and then Eckersley would come in and close the show. Doc Gooden would give you 8 innings and then Jesse Orosco would close the show. No pitcher goes 9 innings anymore. Scherzer is already done for the Rangers, and so is DeGrom. They don't have a start pitcher. Castillo is hard to figure out with the Mariners. He can either be Pedro or next game he gets lit up like a Christmas tree. And even me talking about Pedro was brilliant during the regular season in the 80s and 90s. But in the postseason, he wasn't that guy. And the reason why he wasn't that guy is the good teams figure out strategies how to beat up starting pitchers. And his nemesis, as he would say, the Yankees are my daddy. Because the Yankees figured out how to beat them. Let's stay close. Keep it within one swing of the bat. And then get to their bullpen and get it done. Today, it isn't that. Today's philosophy is we know the starting pitcher isn't going to go more than 6. So 6 through 9 innings, let's focus and let's beat whoever they bring in because they're going to bring in multiple pitchers. And the dumb rules today makes you have to face 3 batters. And so the lineups are set up so that if you do have to bring in someone, you're going to not face the one you're supposed to face. You're going to face probably 2 other guys that you're not supposed to face. And so, like I said before, Major League Baseball is screwing over the pitchers. And that is why you can't sit back at home and say, oh, this year's World Series, yeah, it's going to be the Braves and it's going to be the Astros. No, you can't say that because their bullpens may be good, but they're hittable. Their starting pitchers don't go 9 innings. I mean, yeah, Houston had a guy throw a no-hitter this year, but he hasn't been the same pitcher since. Houston has good pitchers who pitch well against specific teams, but Verlander has not been the same since he's been back to Houston. Javier has not been dominant, and so they're not going to rely on Brown. They're not going to rely on young pitchers to carry him, and so they're relying on that offense and their bullpen, and that's the difference, and that is why I prefer the sports of the 80s and 90s. Because I knew when I watched the sports of the 80s and 90s, I was going to get a guy who was going to be the guy. I knew Jack Morris was going to be tough to beat, and he would pitch his team into the 8th inning and let his bullpen do his thing. I knew that Greg Maddux, who again wasn't a great postseason pitcher, had a decent record, but John Smoltz, on the other hand, was 14-2 for his postseason career. He just was that guy. But not to nitpick, John Smoltz was the 3. He wasn't the 1. If he was the 1, maybe he would have had Maddox's record. But Maddox had the worst record. Tom Glavine had a good postseason record. But again, he wasn't facing one-on-one. That's just my theory. But anyway, enjoy your postseason. You're not going to predict who's going to win what because teams will get to the team's bullpens. And if the bullpens are great, that'll be your world champion. If the bullpen's not great, it ain't going to happen. I'm Richard Harris.